I think we can get started. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this great Adobe seminar, part of a series. And we have some really great experts today to talk to you about the changes in L&D from publishing to really creating an engine. And so I'd like everybody, if you wouldn't mind, to introduce yourself. I'll call your name, and if you could just, just 30 seconds on what you do. Allison?
Hi, yeah, happy to be here. My name is Allison, and I am head of customer education at OpenAI, focused on our workforce education. So my team is responsible for our workforce academy, as well as delivering that through customer journeys. So very relevant conversation today.
Perfect. And Courtney?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. I'm Courtney. I just wrapped up a 10-year career at HubSpot where I was leading our customer education program, HubSpot Academy. And I am now on the consulting side, helping organizations implement customer education programs. Because as I think this group would all agree, it is a real powerhouse in driving revenue and acquisition for your organization. So excited for our call today.
Perfect. And Justin?
Hi, everybody. Justin Seeley. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I currently work at Adobe. I'm the senior e-learning evangelist on the team, primarily representing Adobe Learning Manager, our LMS. So I'm part community advocate, part show pony, I guess is a good way to put it. I come out and do things like this. So very happy to be with everybody and excited to talk about today's topic.
Perfect. And Vikas?
Hey everyone, I'm Vikas Padwani. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback.
Your kitchen's open, probably.
Awesome. Sorry for the tech issues here. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, let's try this one more time.
No, I think it's good now. Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think I was logged into two screens. My name is Vikas Vadwani. I work at Meta. I'm the director for learning and certifications. So responsible for customer partner education and certifications, and happy to be here.
Perfect. So the topic is really about moving again from a content repository and moving it over toward an engine. And a lot of people are nervous right now because we know we have to move from the publishing model. We have to move away from that. And there are different signals in an organization that will maybe help you get permission to do what you need to do to start to move the needle and change your organization. And Courtney, you did this at HubSpot, and I know that there were probably signals that were on the horizon or a business case or some kind of business outcomes you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, one of the biggest signals that we saw, and I think is really relevant, no matter where you are in this stage of your program, it could be small, it could be large, when we started building multiple different use cases. So Academy started, like many do, support deflection. How do we help our CSM stay off the phones? Like very classic use case for a customer education program. But then we started seeing the opportunity to go further into usage, onboarding, retention. And the biggest jump we made was when we actually moved into influencing acquisition because we were able to bring in content leads with our certifications. So we were starting to turn that full flywheel for HubSpot. And it went from just this single use case to multiple different business outcomes. And that was the bigger signal for us that we were ready to kind of, what I like to say, like grow up the program, right? We were in our teenage years, we were ready to really like blossom internally. And similarly, when we started serving multiple different personas that HubSpot was really targeting, not just our customers, but our partners. We were creating partner certifications. We were implementing that as a way to not gatekeep, but really like validate that program that you could be a partner. And it's still used today, even with the introduction of new technology partner programs. But I think that big push of like when you go from single outcome to, oh, we could go here or here or here, that's when you are ready from library to engine, because your systems, your processes, all of that is going to need to scale to support additional business outcomes.
And you said something really important here because sounds like at HubSpot, you shifted from being reactive to being proactive, where you said, we got help desk problems. We got to fix it with training. But then it got to the point where it's part of client acquisition, where training is actually leading the sale or the customer.
Yeah. And HubSpot loves the flywheel model. And one of the things that we started talking about was when we think about the stages of the inbound methodology, where is training supporting on the chevrons, where they connect, where attract becomes engaged, where engaged becomes delight, where previously it was all in that like delight category. It was just like, okay, we help with retention, customers love us, that's great. And don't get me wrong, that's still a huge part of that program. But when you were able to see that you're the connectors between other stages, that was really the like, let's turn this into an engine that's going to run and scale HubSpot's business, not just become, a nice afterthought when we have the opportunity to use it.
That's perfect. Justin, you've worked with a lot of clients who have moved into the academy model. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of similar things? What are the reasons that they're saying that they need to do it or they want to do it?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest examples I can give is I used to lead the seller education initiative at Walmart Marketplace. And so when I got to that job, one of the big things is we had hundreds of tutorials and videos and thousands of help articles and all of these things. So the problem was not like a lack of content. It was more like everything lived in 50 different places. And our customers, which were the sellers, the people who were actually coming to try to make a living on the platform, they were coming, seeing how difficult it was to set things up, and they were dropping off, or they were just going back to what they knew. Maybe that was Amazon or Shopify or whatever the case may be. So really the core theme was frustration for many of those people. And so they would constantly say things, I know you guys have a video about this, but I just can't find it. And so that kind of fragmentation is usually the moment where I've seen a lot of organizations realize that just generating a boatload of content is not the answer, and that people need more than videos and they need more than articles. They need a place where everything connects and where learning can actually help them move forward in whatever that may be. If that's their career, if that's their clients, their customers, whatever the case might be, right? So that's when that conversation starts to shift from how much content do we have to do to how do our customers actually build capability using the resources that we've built. And that's kind of the moment where I think this academy mindset starts to become more system oriented instead of just library oriented.
Yeah, that's really great. You mentioned something really important, because I think you probably have a good answer for this. But the customer's touching everybody. Marketing is concerned about the social media influence and, of course, generating leads. Sales is interested in, of course, closing those leads. Then you have the customer success organization, you have support, you have operations, and training often sits in a very fragmented way. Some of the areas is in the partner organization. Some of it might be as a cost center. Some of it might be in HR. But because it sounds like I remember you told me that you kind of nailed it at Meta, because you're in one area, but you're able to syndicate what you're doing across the organization. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you did.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And the role and placement of customer education there's always a vigorous debate about where should customer education sit, and since it deeply intersects every customer facing function, like you rightly said, and the optimal placement is really not a one size fits all. It really depends upon the company's maturity, business goals, and product complexity. So for us, our customer education team, my team, we sit under marketing. But again, it may not be the right answer for everyone, because ultimately the decision is a strategic one. So if you're an early stage SaaS company, for example, you could sit on the customer success team because you're focused on product market fit and reducing churn. Or if you're a complex, enterprise SaaS company, you could have customer education under professional services because your customers are expected and willing to pay for premium training. Or if you're a product-led, growth company, much like ours, where you're building developer tools and you're building platforms with a strong community focus, marketing is probably the right fit. And we've seen good success over there. But then again, if you're a multi-product SaaS company, with many release cycles, you could have your customer education team on the product team. Or you could have an independent center of excellence for like really mature organizations and that require that strategic unified approach. So again, the decision is a strategic one, and for us, sitting under marketing has benefited us greatly because of how we are structured and built as a team.
But you also mentioned that once when I talked to you earlier, that people adopted your model. They said, you know what, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to use what you're using in marketing. Is that right? They basically said, you know what, you already have it there. It sits in marketing. It doesn't matter. It's a dotted line or whatever else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, regardless of where customer education sits, its success really hinges upon the ability of the team to forge strong partnerships with customer success, support, marketing, product, all the functions that have customer facing functions. Customer success is critical because your CSMs are on the front lines identifying at-risk customers and opportunities for expansion, common challenges. What we've done is we provide them with scalable resources so we can free them up for like more strategic, high-touch interactions. So they definitely benefit, by partnering with us. Customer support teams, they are centered around ticket deflection and problem solving. So when we work with them, it helps them resolve common repetitive questions and common pain points. Our marketing, which is the organization that we sit under, it's a powerful tool for growth and align our content strategy with them to create educational materials that serve as magnets. So we offer certification, webinars, industry reports, and case studies. So it's a tremendous benefit to sit under marketing. And then they help promote our educational materials to a wider audience, and which makes it easier for them to acquire customers. So customer acquisition becomes a benefit for them. And then we are always aligned with the product teams, which is essential so that our customers are successful with new features and product updates. So I think where you sit is, yes, it's somewhat important, but what's more important is who you can partner with, who you can function with.
Allison, from your perspective, what's your secret, or were there any problems that you had to overcome to try to create that type of collaboration?
I totally agree. It can sit in a bunch of different places, and the most important thing is it is really cross-functional. And how are you able to align around a shared goal to make customers successful, regardless of where you sit? So I completely agree. I think without my pathway into this is through our go-to-market team at OpenAI, but also prior. And really what brought me into this was like the rationale that there is so much demand, in particular for AI solutions at the moment. We can never scale success through our people alone. And in the AI space, at least more than what I have experienced in the past, the value that our customer gets from investing time in educating themselves is so high. And the demand for building those skills is so high that we are using education as part of our post-sales motion. And our customer education team has a customer base that we own that segment, we own that number, and we're responsible for them. We apply that foundation across the rest of our enterprise customer base as well. But because we sit in and own a segment through our education programs, we're helping customers make themselves successful. The more obvious place for us is in that post-sales motion, owning a segment alongside other of our GTM counterparts. We work really closely with marketing and product and a lot of the other functions named, but we actually jointly own our academy between customer education and our global affairs team, because those are the two teams at OpenAI who really think the most about educating the world around AI capability.
And especially in your industry, because really you're making a mark. Your industry didn't even exist a few years ago. So training is even more important for advocacy and for cementing customers, right? So, I bet the pressure is kind of on you in a way to be able to get it right, because people can go to another platform, right? If they don't get the right support and training. So it really could be a really good differentiator.
Yeah, and I think we have like an obligation to the marketplace as well, as the brand that we are, to combat, maybe some things that we don't agree with in the AI education space. But there's also the pace. I think as being part of these companies as a whole, the pace that they move and operate is kind of your secret sauce. Like, what can you have a really clear, pointed view about first and break through some of the confusion that people have to deal with when they're trying to learn new things?
Yeah, because your technology is changing every month, whatever it is, right? It's like constant, right? So
it's the biggest challenge, yeah.
And that is stressful for people. And so you're really one of the main arms for customer satisfaction, really. So
Yeah.
I think Priyanka, I think we're going to do a poll question. We wanted to find out how many people actually have an academy, if they're currently using an academy in your organization. So if we could just take a second, if you could look at the poll and see how many people are. Oh, look at that, quite a few.
Ooh, a lot.
And then who owns it here? So we all can look at these numbers then. And then Justin, I want to get with you in just a second to talk about this. Give people just a second. It's changing a little bit. Really very interesting how it's not all L&D by any stretch, right? It's customer success, other. I wonder what other is. It might be support, right? Because we don't have support on there and some other things like that, or operations, or
product, the people
product,
team,
something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we have about a quarter of the audience that has not really gotten into a customer academy. So Justin, perfect timing for you to talk a little bit about, what does a good customer academy look like? What are some of the key or core elements that define it?
Sure. So there's a PDF that everybody will get a copy of today on my real big philosophy on this, but I can kind of distill this down into basically 4 tips I guess I can give people. And first would be to sort of start structuring the academy that you build around customer workflows and not around just releasing content that's like feature specific. So customers usually come to your academy because they're trying to accomplish something or solve a problem. So like when I was at Twitter, they wanted to learn how to launch an ad campaign, or when I was at Snapchat, they wanted to know how to use the augmented reality feature, or they were trying to debug it because they couldn't get it to work as a developer. So when you're designing learning around the workflows that the people are actually doing, then the academy becomes A, a lot easier to navigate, and B, a lot more useful and practical in their estimation. So instead of just publishing isolated courses and creating pathways, you try to create these things that help customers move from beginner to capable practitioner. And that leads into creating what I call a roadmap for capability. So not just a roadmap for content. So product teams plan features. Your education team should be tied with the product team as tightly as you can, so that your education teams can plan the capabilities customers need to develop over time alongside the product roadmap. So what do they need to learn during onboarding? What skills help them become power users later on? Thinking that way gives you the ability to make the academy a clear direction, or give the academy a clear direction instead of just adding more courses to a catalog. And then third is the experience itself. And this is the thing that I think most people underestimate, because a lot of people just throw up a page, it's like a SharePoint site and it's got all of our stuff on it. Like, what else do we need? Well, you need navigation, you need branding, you need structure, and you need a lot of it. Like, if customers log in and immediately understand where they need to go, what they need to learn next, then your engagement is going to improve and the stickiness of what you're creating is going to become a lot better. So that's where, we have a product at Adobe, Adobe Learning Manager. We have a new thing called Experience Builder that allows you to, instead of forcing learners into like a generic LMS experience, you can design the academy experience that matches your brand. So, and the structure, the learning around the journeys that actually matter for you and your customers. You can customize the menus, customize layout, all that kind of stuff, right? Very important. So that kind of flexibility makes the academy feel much more like a part of your product ecosystem rather than a separate thing that they have to go to. And then the last thing is treat the academy like something that needs a launch and an ongoing promotion. So product teams, if you think about how they operate, they don't release features in a vacuum. and just hope people that discover them, they introduce them. They have webinars on why they matter. They keep reminding customers that this capability exists. The same approach works really well for education. So like at Walmart Marketplace, we had a Seller Academy email that went out when new courses, when new videos, when new pathways were created and things like that. When new things were introduced on the platform, new education followed fast right after. So that way there was always a way for them to learn as they go. And I think that really helped. So those are my four.
Yeah, no, this is really good. And if you follow L&D and some of the thought leaders in L&D right now, there is a big movement away from these structured pathways toward decision pathways, right? I mean, the bottom line is people have to have an answer immediately. They just want to get what they've done, and they're going to go. Mostly, they're going to go to YouTube, right? They're going to, but 80% of them, or 78%, go to YouTube because they need an instant answer. And so, I think it's really important for L&D organizations to get out there, understand the personas at a very deep level, and understand the decisions they're going to need to make during the day. And that way you'll have the answer for them. You have a decision to make, here's what it is, right? It's very different than the way we used to do it, where you'd go through this very structured, course tick 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now people are jumping all over the place because they got to get the job to be done that day. And Courtney, I know that you've worked with a lot of organizations building these types of solutions. Could you tell us a couple stories, maybe some good ones or some bad ones, whatever? But I think that we learn a lot from the ones that failed, right? If you have any in mind, I don't know if you do. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, and I like where this conversation is going to, because it is getting into, I think, a lot of the elephants in a lot of rooms for customer education programs, which is, do we deploy our education into LLMs? Do we put it in the product? Do we sort of unleash it from these core course structures, academy websites that we've become so familiar with, and is I would say, our comfort zone now? And a client that I'm working with right now, we started talking about this idea of like, how do we start to like think about your academy as a product, not as a learning system, but as a product that we're going to develop, iterate over time, exactly like what Justin was talking about, of like, launch it, get it out there, like create this cycle. And, we started to get into it, and, very clearly the executives that we were talking with were very nervous about the idea of like, well, we're going to go from this content library to more of a democratized learning model where our education is going to live in a lot of different places. And the big thing that we hit immediately was, I was like, I don't want to hear about the features of your LMS or the features that we want to get out there, like playlists. I don't really care. That's all nice and all, but what are the actual outcomes that we are going to be achieving with the learning that we're providing? Because at the end of the day, we have all sorts of ways to deploy it. YouTube is still a great way. If your company doesn't have a branded YouTube where there's videos maybe from users or thought leaders, like, you probably should. You want to be in all those different places. And so we went from this conversation of not connecting. They were like, well, we want to do this playlist on this. I'm like, great. How is it connected back to our job to be done? And they're like, well, they'll figure it out. We like have to have the playlist. And I'm like, what is a playlist? Why do I care about that? Why do me, as a learner of your product, honestly, like, care that I just got an email about your new learning path when I don't know how it's going to serve me? And so we went and said, okay, we need to have not just a roadmap for the features and some of the courses, et cetera, but we need to think about what is going to be the activation rate that we're achieving, what's going to be the usage that we're looking at, and become very outcome oriented. And so this is where, on the flip side, I've been working with a client where immediately I went in and they're like, okay, Courtney, it's going to be embarrassing, but we're all about the features. We're all about our content library. They like laid it out for me, and they're all like sheepishly looking at me on Zoom. I'm like, it's okay. That's where most of us are starting right now, because that's the way the market's been for the last decade. And it has been so impactful for us to get us now to this inflection point. Now we are at a place where we can chart a new path. And trust me, 10 years from now, there will be a new path to chart. Customer education is still going to be around. You can quote me on that. I don't care what technology is doing. People still need to learn. And so I think those are the two places I've seen people come from, which is I'm nervous about going from where we are to I know I'm in the wrong place. Just how am I going to start to move forward? And Allison, I'd love to hear from your perspective too. Like one of the biggest unlocks we did with HubSpot Academy was start to feed it into the big LLM models. I'm sorry, but your users are going to chat, they're going to Claude, they're going wherever and typing in, how do I do this thing? Sorry, not gonna like paint the two
Well,
against
no,
each other.
I
Like
mean, that's
it's
a
the
really
same.
important point, though. And because Allison, I'd love to hear that, because ultimately, what we want to do is we want to be able to provide trusted answers for people, right?
Yeah.
And the other day, it's not a knock on AI, but I had a problem doing something at home. I was trying to install something with a garage door opener, and I went through and I asked the question, and it gave me very specific answers on how to do it. I mean, down to where I should look for the labels and everything else, and it was 100% wrong. It was 100% wrong, and I couldn't. But the manufacturer didn't have an option for me, so it really was my best option. But I still had to figure it out on my own. So there is an opportunity, I think, like you said, to use all these different tools, but it also has to get back to what can be trusted, right? And maybe Allison can talk a little bit about that, because I know that's a big issue in your industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's probably like two points that I would respond to here. One is I do think the way people learn, whether you're learning a technology or whether you're learning in a school or a third level education, like it's going to look very different in the next 10 years. I think there's going to be a lot of change that we see, and some of the conversation is like, and anything that is responsible for education is going to have to evolve. And there's a massive opportunity to make learning more personal, more contextual. And in my world of things, I get the luxury of thinking about how am I using our products to teach people how to use our products. I think when so we have like a lot of leeway, and we're building our certifications in ChatGPT. So it's contextualized to the learner and what ChatGPT knows about the learner. It's also contextual. It's also really applied. Try it. We've seen AI is so experimental, and you need to be comfortable with experimentation to keep up with the pace. So we can think about that problem a little bit within our own like home as it was, and we have like a lot of runway. I do think those principles are going to have to be brought elsewhere in some way, shape, or form over time. To your point, David, like people want a response to their question, and that's what you went looking for, and you got the wrong answer. And yeah, I think like, over time, AI is hallucinating less, not never. And in very specific contents, it happens more. And AI as it has to mature as a whole to help solve for that. And it happens in some cases more than others, but that is a researcher problem versus an Allison problem.
Yeah.
I like.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say to that is, as well as like, there's this sort of motion on the front end. And then something that we don't talk a lot about of like how this also changes the way that we evaluate the success of our customer education programs. Like so much of what we've done today is like engagement, like what are they completing? But if that education now lives in all these different surfaces, that engagement isn't going to be how we evaluate it, but more in, did activation increase? Did usage increase? Are we seeing the indicators that our customers are actually more successful? And this is where I will say, and I will put this on revenue leaders, if you are not supporting your customer education program with the data, with the analytics, with the integrations they need to show that, you're not going to be able to get the value. And I like to talk, I know we talk a lot about like time to value, like value continuity. Like, how do you see that value increase over time? Not just at the like first part. And I like to back end that conversation of like, as we change the surfaces of where customer education is, make sure you're following it up with that like second piece of let's make sure the evaluation of it changes with it too.
Yeah, I mean, it really, if you're not tied to the C-suite objectives and what's essential in the organization, you're going to get cut, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. You have to be essential to the organization. And the way to be essential to the organization is to understand what does the organization need, right? it usually means saving money, making money, saving time is where you start there, right? But then there are other things below that. But you're right, there are those metrics that are historically just been interesting to L&D, and they're not. And because from your perspective, I mean, you worked in a lot of major enterprises. Have you seen a difference or shift in that more toward, hey, you know what are the outcomes? What are the business outcomes, or how are we moving the needle?
Oh yeah, 100%, David. I think just depending on the maturity of the organization and the customer service, the customer education team and the organization, the conversations can look very different. And we are very, very focused on business outcomes because I spoke earlier about all the teams that we work with cross-functionally, and they don't speak the language of learning outcomes. They are looking for business outcomes. They don't care about completion rates and things of that nature, or course views and customer satisfaction. What they really care about is, did you drive the business outcome that our team is looking for? The customer support team is looking for ticket deflection and reduced number of cases for like the common things that they were seeing. You're working with the product team, they're looking for product adoption. And it's almost like you have to be a chameleon when you're talking to these different teams and speak to them in their language so that they can appreciate what you're doing for them, and not just speak that way, but also be able to measure those things and earn that trust by showing them those metrics over time. So 100%, I think it's like you work with 5 different teams, you're tracking 5 different metrics for them, and you're speaking to them in a language that they understand and appreciate as a shared goal that your team has with them. And that makes a huge difference in terms of how you approach, customer education and how you partner with various teams internally.
When I created the IBM Digital Badge Program, it was the first big digital credential program. And I had just come off working on what was called the Smarter Workforce at IBM. So all I was interested in was marketing. And I created this PowerPoint deck that was all about social media impressions and how much it's going to generate in social media, and people are going to be flowing into LinkedIn and all this other stuff. And it fell flat. And I talked to my manager about it, and I think that he gave me a really important tip that I've used for the rest of my life. It's like, what's the audience listening for? Right? And I said, well, they want to hear about badges. And he says, no, they don't. He says the salespeople want to hear about how you're increasing leads. The marketing people want to know about brand identity and trust, support, all these other things. So you really have to start with, what is the audience listening for if you're going to try to sell these types of programs. Once I started getting some good data, and I found that people that earned 2 or more badges came back for a third, and we polled them, they said 87% said, we want a deeper relationship with your brand, and it was increasing retention, all these other things. Now they were interested. And I asked them, I said, you mean I have to create 5 PowerPoint presentations for all these different audiences, support and everything? He says, yes, you have to create 5 separate messages. And I think, Justin, from your perspective, selling these types of programs internally, where do you sell this to? I mean, how do you pitch it if you're in a position now where you're in this publishing model, you're starting to see these signals, right? Mm-hmm. What do you do to try to get people on board with what your message is without using these typical metrics that we've used in L&D?
Yeah, so I had a really good mentor when I was at Twitter. His name was Jim Connolly, who I think some of the people on the call may have worked with in the past. And Jim actually has this framework that's called the CXO framework. And it's basically a question and answer model for how to talk to different people at the C-suite and give them information from your education program that matters to them. So it's like how to move the emotional needle for these people at these levels. And also, I've kind of translated that back into like a stakeholder framework as well. And so it's basically figuring out, before you walk into that room, what are the things that those people care about? Like you were just talking about, from a marketing perspective, you cared about X, Y, and Z, and you went in there and it fell flat. Well, my boss would have told you back then that's because likes don't go in his wallet. Like that's the kind of thing that you know what I mean? So you have to figure out like what moves them. And then what are you creating? What type of system are you building that is going to meaningfully connect to something that they care about and move that forward? And then at the same time, save money, save time, whatever those metrics are. So it's different for each one. The questions that you ask are different for each one, but that's a framework that you have to develop for yourself. And that's something you can only do within your own organization because you don't know what those people do until you talk to them. So I would say get over the fear of walking into those rooms, talk to those people. They're just normal folks, most of them, and have a conversation before you even go in to present, and just say, like, if I were to do this, what are the things that you would care about? What are the things you would like to see? Jim used to go into rooms with stakeholders and say, if I could wave a magic wand for you tomorrow and make one problem go away, what would that problem be? And that became the Courtney might have heard this
I was
based
like,
on that.
I still use the magic wand question of like, if you could wave a magic wand, because it's so powerful. It brings forward that visualization of like, what can we make easier for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that I do when I walk into those rooms is I use a system that I was taught when I was at Snapchat. I actually learned it there. Value selling, which is a selling technique for people, but there's a questioning framework inside of that, the open, probe, confirm framework of asking questions. So asking an open-ended question of them, what would they like to see out of this? Then probing deeper, like, well, I heard you say this. Does that mean that you need X, Y, and Z? And then at the very end, so what I'm hearing is, if I were to do this, it would solve this problem for you, and then it would do X for the business. And that level of understanding, when you walk out of that room, those are problem statements to solve. Those are behaviors to change, and those are learning objectives that get tacked onto courses, videos, and all that kind of stuff.
That's really great. It's the 5 whys kind of in a way, and solving the Monday morning problems that executives have. But you said something really interesting. I'd love to anybody else comment on this, because when I was pitching, developing these new programs at IBM, I realized I read a book called Switch, and it was about doing transformation. And did anybody else read Switch? I mean, it's really an interesting book. But anyway, it talks about, if you don't appeal to the emotional side of the brain and the rational side of the brain, you can't get something sold. You have to, and you mentioned that, Justin, just real briefly about that, because there is an emotional sell there as well. People make their decisions based on emotion, and they back it up with ration or reason, rather, right? And I don't know, Allison, because if you've seen that in your organization when you're trying to sell a thing like this.
No, absolutely, David. I think what you said about appealing to both sides. I was at a conference earlier this week, and one of the keynote speakers, he said that make small decisions with your head and make big decisions with your heart. And you have to appeal to both sides, and depending on what's at stake and what you're trying to get alignment for in the conversation with these various teams, it is essential that you go prepared to speak to them in their language. Just having teams, just telling teams, hey, work with each other, collaborate with each other is really not sufficient. There's multiple things that really need to come together for this cross-functional thing to work. So, having a clear governance model, for example, that outlines the roles and responsibilities, and establishing a process to figure out how are you going to prioritize different things, different initiatives. That's really, really critical. Implementing a service level agreement, that helps manage expectations tremendously, and it ensures accountability, and it also helps in gaining trust, because you are holding yourself accountable to certain service level agreements. Also, fostering a culture of these shared goals and metrics is perhaps the most critical, and I think it's not spoken about enough. And executive sponsorship is, of course, very, very helpful, because it helps secure resources and remove roadblocks and things of that nature. But I think the most important culmination of all of these things is being able to influence folks without having the authority, right? Because what you're trying to do is build strong relationships, communicate a compelling vision, and really use data to guide the conversations around the shared goals. I think that's perhaps like one of the most critical things, I would say, in terms of how all of this comes together.
That's a really good kind of a segue to what we wanted to talk about. Now, listen, maybe you can start with this, but everybody can just chip in on this. But our systems are getting smarter, right? And we're getting better data, and we're having all these things like automation, data intelligence. All of these things are new skills that L&D has to learn. And how do you? Well, first of all, how are they impacting the solutions you're using? Number one, and B, is that data or that data intelligence helping to advance things like academies in your organization? And Allison, I'll start with you, because I'm obviously, you're purely a data company, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the trends, I think, in customer education that is really healthy and positive is owning kind of the who the customers are, what they need to know, what good looks like, but also owning like the distribution of that knowledge through the content itself, but also like email delivery lifecycle, events, etc. So in my team, we own both the content and the distribution through creation of the journeys. And if you're going to do the latter well, you need to be in the data. There is no way to figure out who needs what when if you're not looking at the data and digging into the retention trends and the onboarding trends and what features are actually driving more adoption and better outcomes in the long term. So by leaning into the distribution, which I think is just a trend that we're seeing in customer education continue to grow, to do that well, you necessarily need to be more connected to the data aspects of your customer performance. And that brings you through to, connections with ops and data science. And it brings you through to kind of a shared view of the customer lifecycle with product organizations and success organizations as well. And it creates that, like, because I think what you started to talk about, like being very data driven in this work, like you are aligning around a shared view of the customer that is in opinions. And that is like really, really strong for thinking about, okay, how are we collectively driving at the right things, the same things, and making the pie bigger? Customer education is such an enormous and touches everything space, which is like the exciting part, but also one of the most challenging parts. The reason I start there is because I think in order to tap into like, doesn't AI do that magic, you have to have those foundations. You really have to have the foundations of understanding your customer base, knowing where that data lives, defining what good looks like across the journey, so that you can, if you can't kind of automate touch points, you're probably not going to be able to build AI solutions around them. So I would say, like, if you're not leaning into that, that is one of the first steps, because it forces you to understand the data. LLMs can help you process that data much faster and identify trends much faster. And I would definitely recommend that. But until you kind of get your head around that, what is the personalization and personalization principles kind of leads from that. I think the promise of personalization is amazing and it works. I think the trick is having the systems that let you do that at scale.
That's excellent, Allison. Anybody who signed up for HubSpot knows that it's highly personalized, right? And there's a personalized journey to get you onboarded and everything else, or it seems to be anyway. From your perspective, how are these tools starting to improve the journeys or the intelligence in the organization?
Yeah,
I meant Courtney. I'm sorry, I meant Courtney.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm
No
sorry,
worries. I was
like,
yeah, no worries. I was like, I think I'm listening to this question. I think this is a question for me. Sorry, David. Now repeat that for me for a second.
Well, I'm sorry, Allison. You don't have to answer about HubSpot.
Yeah. So like the personalization elements, it's a lot of what Allison said is like, if you aren't building the foundation of data and trust with that data, like it's just junk in, junk out from a personalization standpoint. And where I've really leaned into, particularly with some of the like coaching I've done now, is how do we think about the system that you have today, what needs to change about it for so many customer ed L&D products. You are kind of like changing and moving a cruise ship. Like you have all of this data that you're sitting on, and it can be really overwhelming to say, all right, how do we build a taxonomy for it? How do we get it into a structure where we can do segmentation and adapt messages and do personalization? Because you're rarely starting from zero. Now, if you're starting from zero, amazing. Like, go to Allison's Education Academy and like learn about how you should set this up from day one, but we're usually not there. And so a lot of what I've talked about is how can we leverage basically being user researchers. Now that we have the data, everyone can go in and start to build those points of view on who our customers are, what we need to do with them, so that we can have a common understanding across product, customer success, marketing, on what that user, learner, customer journey is. Because I think that's where we get stuck a lot. for folks is in customer education, we're in our little bubble and we're like, the user journey starts here and then it goes here and then it goes here. And then you go across the hallway virtually or in person to your product leader and you're like, does this look like your user journey? And they're like, absolutely not. This is my user journey and this is what we do. And you're like, okay. So it doesn't matter how much data we have if we're not actually coming at it from the same perspective. But now, if we can take that step back and say, all right, we're going to unify this with all of these amazing inputs, come up with a generally common understanding of what the user journey is going to be, we can now start to personalize it. And I think I saw even some questions in the chat. This influences distribution, emails, product announcements. This is where if we can get that common thread going, our customers are going to feel like we're not shipping our org chart to them, because that's often their experience with large organizations is I got one thing from marketing, another thing from product, and then customer education sent me a course. Why do I care about these three things that seem like unconnected? But now we can start to do that personalization. And also, I like using personalization because I think there's something about it. I think more about it is like adapting the message. How do we adapt it to the different stages? Not necessarily, I think a lot of organizations are pretty far away from like deep contextual personalized learning where you like type something in and it like generates the perfect course for you. I think we'll get there. I know we will, but for now, like think about adapting the message to the right stage using the data that you have.
Because you're nodding your head, and I'm sure that your industry has changed a lot. And I think people really do in L&D, they have to become data analysts and consultants really when they're more than they were before, right? The publishing model goes away, but that opens a really big door for being a decision manager or somebody who can influence the decisions in the organization with all the data you have.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I think, there's no dearth of data. We keep hearing this term data-driven or data-informed, and I think what's important is to be able to sort through all of the data and get some information out of it. There's a tremendous amount of noise in the data, and if you're looking at the data from a wrong perspective, or if you're picking up on the wrong signals, you could actually be data-driven and still make really like poor decisions or like bad mistakes that you will find out only later down the line. So I think what's really crucial is not just the ability to sort through the data, but really glean the information nuggets out of it and make sure that the stakeholders that you're working with are all aligned in terms of the information that you got out from the data. Also, there's, with LLMs and with all these AI tools that we have, there's never been a time that we've been able to create large amounts of personalized content at scale. But at the same time, there can be a lot of customer fatigue when you're throwing a ton of learning modules at them and really giving them what they are looking for. So, you can measure that in your drop-off rates. I mean, you can feel happy that you created a large amount of personalized stuff and you launched 100 courses. But if your drop-off rate is high, then you're probably having a lot of customer fatigue at that point in time. Because, personalization is good, but what is necessary is to solve their problem in the moment and meet them where they are. So yes, data is great, but information is more important. Personalization is great, but solving the customer problem is more important.
Yeah, really making it, yeah. So there's a skill there doing that. So Justin, from an Adobe, from a manufacturing perspective, what does that mean for Adobe Learning Manager from the technologies? Are things starting to shift based on the personas in L&D, how their jobs are changing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a couple of things. So if we take it from a learner's perspective, first of all, when I've gone out in conferences this year, the one thing that I've heard from a lot of L&D professionals is we've been told that we need to serve learning at the moment of friction. The problem is we can't tell where that friction exists. So that tells me that you have bad or dirty or unconnected data sources, right? So that's number one. So making sure that those pipes are completely connected and connected cleanly will give you those moments of friction, and then you can start to surface the learning at that moment of friction when the proper signals arise. Now, what those signals are could depend on whatever type of product that you have and how you're embedding it and all of that kind of stuff. From the Adobe perspective, we have obviously an LMS that can be completely headless. So this thing can exist throughout your existing systems already. And we're building things like our AI learner assistant. And the learner assistant is a persistent thing that is with you all the time. It is trained on the data that's within your system. So as long as your content is up to date and there's a central source of truth, in theory, you should be able to query this thing without entering a course, without having to click on a video. And it should be able to give you guidance along the way with contextual citations that will lead you to the deeper learning should you need it. But in theory, you're hopefully triaging your problem as you go. And I think that's going to become more and more powerful for people, because most of the time the friction that we see with learners, it's not happening while they're in the LMS. That's actually happening while they're doing their job. It's happening while they're using the tool. It's, that kind of thing. And I had a good conversation with a person in San Diego last week at an event, and he was talking about how they do a lot of on-the-floor training at a large manufacturing plant. And one of the things that is crucial for something like that is safety. And so what they were trying to do is figure out how is there a way for us to trigger a just-in-time learning for somebody who maybe hasn't completed the safety course for this big machine, that if you don't stand more than 6 feet away from it, you can lose a limb. Now that's a pretty big deal, right? That's a little bit bigger of a deal than did they complete the, anti whatever compliance training. So, the idea was, how do we surface that, and how fast can we get it there, and how do we connect all these different things? These are the things that people are solving in real time out in L&D, and that's what tools like this, like feeding your stuff into an LLM, building an assistant, building an agent that'll proactively go out and research the learner for you, that all that kind of stuff is going to become immensely more important over the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think that, or even maybe the next 1 to 3, I don't think that we're as close to the Netflix of learning as a lot of people want, because I don't know that you're ever going to get people to just come and binge learning. I think what we're more likely to have is like a need for like a butler, like a Clippy from Microsoft that just shows up all the time. It looks like you're trying to do this. And that kind of thing. That's what I think is mostly going to come out of this. And I'm looking forward to it personally, like devices I can wear, earphones, eyeglasses, wrist things, whatever. Something that when I'm doing something, because like you were trying to do a garage door, I'm terrible at all things in the house. My wife would like to think that I'm not. 9 times out of 10, that's because there's a YouTube video open on the engine while I'm looking at it. So like same kind of thing there, right? Like how do I solve problems in that time? So that's kind of what I would say.
Very interesting. Generative AI is going to be the model for it, right? There's going to be a search box. Where do you want to go today? What do you need to do? What's the problem you need to solve? So we're up against the clock a little bit. We have a few minutes left. So we said 25% of the people on the call have never started an academy at all. 75% have. And Allison, I wonder from your perspective, if you're giving people advice, I don't know if you can do both audience or just one. What would you say people should do in the 30, 60, 90 days? What are the 1 or 2 things that they should do to get started on something like this, on this journey? Or improve what they already have, right?
Yeah, I think there was the theme started, right? Like more content isn't necessarily better. And I do think when you're dealing with a lot of audiences internally and trying to serve your customer as best you can, sometimes what happens is all the content just exists and it's very hard to navigate. So I think that is something that I would keep in mind, and the way that I would think about that from like what's feasible in a 30 or 60-day window is like really define and make decisions about what good use looks like, or good education looks like for your audience. Like what is the behaviors they're taking, and work back from that on like what is your core learning pathway and what content best supports your core learning pathway. And if someone lands on your page, whether it's personalized for them or they can easily navigate to what's relevant for them, that's what I would think is most important. The other thing I would say is like, make sure, rather than, I wouldn't go like rip everything apart and start fresh. You will get lost in that cycle forever. Like look at what you have and say, are we getting the most of what we already have? Academies are like an incredible place to codify and make decisions around like your expertise or the expertise that you want to build. And can you find the points, like, the guy who we don't want to lose a limb, to distribute the piece of content that you probably have already, or the piece of knowledge that you already have already to them more effectively.
Alice, Courtney, same question.
I was like, you're really getting our names mixed up. I like it.
I'm looking in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, unfortunately, but anyway.
No worries. Yeah, so one of the things that I sit down and do with my clients is we sort of do a little bit of the like, what are we not going to do in the build out of our customer academy? Because it is so easy to get trapped in the like, we have to buy the super fancy LMS, we have to build the production studio. Oh my gosh, we need the certification program right now. And I like to say, we're going to take a real deep breath around that, and we're going to go listen, build, show impact. We want to spend the first 30 days listening to our customers, listening to our CSMs, our sales reps, our marketing teams. I want to know the problems, and I want to listen to the customers. If you don't have a way to listen to them, voice of the customer programs, community, I want to make sure those programs are going, because I need both in and out. I need what the company's perspective on what's going right or wrong, and I need the customer's perspective on what is working. And then we're going to start to build very like MVP. Like I'm talking about very lightweight, whether it's some content, to Allison's point, maybe you're repurposing existing content. I know a lot of people today kind of lean away from live training, but that's a great repeatable model early days, because you're not having to build this really big infrastructure like we're doing right now. Spin up a webinar, spin up a boot camp, get some people who are knowledgeable about your product, your methodology, your framework in front of your customers, and start to get those live, inputs from them. And that's where we want to show impact. With a 90-day rollout of anything from a customer education program, I want to know what I'm showing at the end of the 90 days. Particularly for early stage startups, you often don't have a ton of time to prove your value. I hate that we have to say that, but you are going to have to prove your value at some point. And so if you've started at the first part, just like, getting content out there and not knowing where the value is going to be at the end of the 90 days, it's going to be really hard to say this was successful. So I like to break it down in there. We're going to listen. We're going to get real clear on business outcomes. We're going to build something small. We're going to show the impact. And once we've shown the impact, this is where Adobe Learning Manager, these incredible systems, you also now have the proof that you need to make that investment as an organization to purchase things to help scale this. If you try to do that at the forefront, it can be really difficult to show the value before you've actually done anything.
I think that, you mentioned the voice of the customer. So many people forget that, right? They think that they do all their persona work. Maybe it's in a design thinking workshop, or they do it on their own, or whatever else. So they do all this persona work, and they don't really bring in the voice of the customer enough, right? And sometimes it's hard to do, because L&D sometimes is siloed off from things. So, but there are data sources. There may be NPS scores. There may be something just talking to a sales rep, right? Or a sales leader, just calling them up, looking through and say, who can I talk to, once a week or everything, to get their perspective on what's going on out in the field.
My best advice when you're in that 90 days, first 12 months, is be scrappy as possible. Like, I don't care if you're not going to be able to scale it long term, but just get the information, talk to the sales rep, look at Gong recordings, whatever your company is doing. I want you to be the just like collector of information. We'll figure out how we make that, a program or operationalize it later. Let's first start with, what do we know? What do we not know? And yes, please talk to your customers, because they're the ones who are actually going to take the learning. Excellent.
Because you have 30 seconds, what should people do or not do in the next 30 days?
Okay, great. So this is rapid fire. If you're a level 1 customer education team run by a small group or one person, start with a log of your most frequent customer support tickets and create short courses or videos. Stop creating comprehensive everything but the kitchen sink courses, and prioritize solving 1 or 2 specific pain points. If you're level 2 strategic operator, do a content audit, gap analysis to decide what to keep, what to delete, what to update. Start reporting on business metrics, and stop reporting on vanity metrics like course completions, and connect your education to 1 or 2 business outcomes. And if you're super mature transformational customer education team, start creating personalized learning paths and choose 1 or 2 customer segments to do that. stop treating all customers the same way and prioritize automating the feedback loop with the partner team and build the dashboards to show the results.
Perfect. Justin, we're out of time, but I think Adobe has resources, and I think you have some resources you've developed with Adobe that people are going to get. So I don't know how they're going to get them. I don't know if we can put it in the chat, or is it going to go out after? Maybe Priyanka is going to send it out as a follow-up.
So I think they're going to send it out, but also you can get it from my LinkedIn as well. I'll put my LinkedIn in the chat. But if you want a quick cheat sheet in the document when you get it, if you're new, page 7. If you are existing, page 13 and 14. And then if you are existing and you're like, oh my God, these people just told me we had to completely redo what we just did. No, you don't. Read page 16. That's it.
Perfect. And then I guess everybody, people can connect with us on LinkedIn, right? So you got our names and just connect with us there. And thank you very much. It's been a great session.
Thank you all. This is super fun.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
David.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.